The cake had 6 candles. Alara counted them twice, the way she always counted things that mattered, quietly, with her hands steady, and her heart anything but. She had pressed the candles into the white frosting herself that morning while Leon was still sleeping, and she had allowed herself, just for a moment, to feel the particular kind of joy that only mothers know, the joy of watching someone you love become more themselves with every passing year. 6 years. She had kept him safe for 6 whole years. She told herself that was enough. She told herself that every single day. The cottage was warm and full of the smell of pine and sugar. Gran, the old healer who had delivered Leanne, and never once asked a question she didn't already know the answer to, sat in her chair by the window and hummed something low and wordless. 2 children from the village ran circles in the yard outside, their laughter cutting clean through the autumn air. Leon stood at the center of all of it, in his oak leaf crown, looking at his cake with the serious concentration of someone receiving very important information. "You have to make a wish," Alara told him. "I know," he said. "I'm thinking." "You've been thinking for a while. Wishes are important, Mama." She smiled. She could not help it. She never could, with him. He closed his eyes. He took a breath. He blew. Every candle went out. And then the world went strange. The silver light came from behind Leon's ear, from the small crescent mark he had been born with. The one she told curious neighbors was just a birthmark. The one she knew was something far older than any name she could give it. It flared like a star, like something that had been waiting patiently for exactly this moment, and the light swept outward from it in a slow, breathtaking wave. Every flame in the cottage snuffed out and came back silver. The air changed. Gran stopped humming and went very still, her old eyes wide open. The 2 children in the yard stopped running and looked toward the cottage with expressions that did not belong on the faces of 7-year-olds. The forest beyond the yard fell completely, absolutely silent. Then, somewhere deep in the trees, a wolf howled. Then another. Then everything at once. Alara's hands went cold. She knew what the light meant. She had always known this day would come. She had simply bargained with herself, year after year, that it would come a little later. She looked at her son, who was staring at his own hands with wide silver eyes and an expression of pure wonder, and she felt the future arriving like weather she had seen on the horizon for 6 years and could no longer outrun. She picked up the bag she kept under her bed. She told Gran to say nothing. She took Leon's hand and walked out into the yard with the practiced calm of a woman who had rehearsed this moment too many times to panic now. She had 3 routes out of the borderlands memorized. She reached the tree line before she smelled it. Pine, iron, rain. Something else beneath all of that. Something that made her feet slow without her permission and her wolf go so quiet inside her chest that the silence itself felt like a sound. She turned. He was standing 50 feet away in the trees, still as stone, watching her with eyes the color of storm clouds. He was taller than she remembered, or perhaps she had simply spent 6 years shrinking the memory of him down to something she could manage. He was not in armor. He wore dark traveling clothes, and there was road dust on his boots, and the expression on his face was one she could not read, which frightened her more than any expression she could have named. King Kalen Voss had come to the borderlands himself. Behind him, through the trees, she could see the shapes of soldiers. Not on the road, around the village. He had circled it before she ever smelled him coming. She did not run. There was nowhere left to go that mattered. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Leanne, who was standing beside her holding her hand and looking at the large stranger in the trees with the fearless curiosity of a child who had not yet learned to be afraid of kings. "How old is he?" Kalen asked. His voice was exactly the same. She had been hoping it would be different. 6, she said. Today. The word landed between them like a stone into still water. She watched the circles move outward across his face, something passing through him that he did not let break the surface, that he held down with the practiced control of a man who had spent years making his feelings obey him. His jaw tightened, his eyes stayed on Leanne. "Why?" he said. Not a question. A request. She reached into the pocket of her coat and took out a piece of folded bark. She had carried it for 6 years. The words on it were written in her own handwriting, copied from the voice that had spoken them to her in the old tongue on the night she realized she was carrying his child. A voice like wind through standing stones. A voice that did not belong to any living thing. She held it out to him. He crossed the distance between them, and took it without touching her hand. He read it. He read it again. She watched his face, and said nothing. He folded it carefully, and looked up at her. Before he could say anything else, Leon let go of her hand, and walked forward. He stopped directly in front of Kaelin, and looked up at him with the total confidence of a child who has never been taught that large, silent men in the woods are supposed to be frightening. "Your wolf is sad," Leon said. Kaelin looked at him. "Is he?" he said, after a moment. Leon nodded. "Mine is too, sometimes. Mama says that's okay." Kaelin went very still. He lowered himself slowly to one knee, so that his eyes were level with Leon's. Alara watched the Alpha King of 5 Kingdoms look at his son for the first time, and she let herself feel the grief of that for exactly one breath before she put it away. Then she stepped forward. "We should talk," she said. "Inside." They talked for a long time. She told him everything. The prophecy, the choice, the years of silence. She told him about the Borderlands cottage, and Gran, and the neighbors who believed Leon's father was a traveling merchant who had not come back. She told him about the nights she had almost written to him, and the mornings she had talked herself back from it. She did not apologize, she explained. There was a difference, and she was counting on him to hear it. He listened without interrupting. That surprised her. She had expected anger, the cold, contained kind, that she remembered from stories about the way he handled betrayal in his court. Instead, he sat across from her at her small kitchen table, with the bark prophecy in front of him, and listened until she had nothing left to say. Then he said, "I want to know him. Not, I am taking him. Not, you will come to Ironmoor. Not, you had no right." She had prepared herself for all of those. She had not prepared herself for that. "That is what we are going to have to negotiate," she said carefully. The corner of his mouth moved. "I know," he said. "I know that." They left the next morning, not as a king commanding, but as a man asking. He gave his word on his wolf, which was the oldest promise a wolf could make, and she accepted it, because she had spent 6 years being careful, and she was not going to stop now. But she had also spent 6 years carrying a weight that was always meant to be shared, and she was tired. Leon asked questions for 3 solid days. Could Kaelin turn into a wolf? How big? Was it scary? Did he know any knights? Did the castle have dogs? Were there other children? Could a wolf swim? Why did soldiers wear boots if wolves didn't need shoes? Kaelin answered every single one. By the time the towers of Ironmoor appeared on the horizon, Leanne had fallen asleep against Kaelin's arm on the seat of the carriage, an event that seemed to have shocked Kaelin far more deeply than any diplomatic crisis ever had. He sat very carefully for the remaining hour of the journey, barely breathing, as though any movement might break something precious. Ilara watched him from across the carriage, and did not say a word. The castle received them with the particular chill of a place that had not expected guests, and did not know what to make of them, the court whispered. Servants glanced sideways, and on the second afternoon, Lady Seraphine Dusk came to find Ilara in the herb garden where she had gone to be alone. She was beautiful. She was also, Ilara saw immediately, extremely intelligent, which was far more relevant. She sat down on the stone bench beside Ilara without being invited, and looked at the garden for a moment. "I'm not your enemy," she said. "I didn't think you were," Ilara said. "But I'm also not leaving," Seraphine said. "I want to be honest with you about that. My family signed that treaty. The peace it protects is real." Ilara looked at her. "I'm not here to take anything from you." Seraphine studied her for a long moment. "No," she said finally, as though she had been deciding whether to believe it and had just made up her mind. "I don't think you are." She left. Ilara sat with the rosemary and thought about what it meant to be looked at clearly by someone and not flinched at. On the third day, 3 letters arrived from 3 different kingdoms. Kaelin read them in his study. He did not show Ilara. He told himself it was because he was still gathering information, which was true, and because he wanted to protect her, which was also true. and because some part of him was still learning how to stop doing everything alone, which was truest of all. Seraphine found Alara before he could. She handed her the most important letter without commentary. She did not explain why she was sharing it. She simply placed it in Alara's hands and waited. Alara read it. It was from the Hallowed Vale, a kingdom long silent, long thought diminished, and it said, in the clipped language of people who had learned to say dangerous things briefly, "The silver anchor cannot be allowed to exist. We remember what the last one cost us." She found Kaelin immediately. What followed was the argument she had been ready for since the beginning. She told him she was not a person to be managed. She told him she had kept their son alive for 6 years through careful thinking, and if he shut her out of decisions about that son's safety, she would be gone before he could post guards at the gates, and he already knew she was capable of disappearing. He looked at her for a long moment, then he did the thing she had not expected him to do twice in 1 week. He sat down, folded his hands on the desk, and told her everything. The Hallowed Vale had been home to the previous silver anchor, 40 years ago. That child had been used, not loved, not protected, but used as a living weapon by a kingdom that understood the power and none of the responsibility. The resulting war had burned 3 kingdoms and left the Vale a ghost of what it had been. What they feared was not Leanne. It was themselves, and what they had done the last time. Alara sat with that for a moment. Then she said, "Then we have to show them it will be different." "Yes," he said, "I know." "Together," she said. He met her eyes. "Together," he said. It was not forgiveness. It was not yet anything she had a word for, but it was the first sentence of something new, and she recognized it for what it was. The summit came 10 days later, all 5 kingdoms. The first gathering of its kind in 40 years. Leanne sat at the back of the great chamber, with a piece of parchment and a stick of charcoal, drawing quietly, while ancient alphas argued around him, in careful diplomatic language that meant, underneath all of it, we are afraid. The representative from Ashfen stood up and demanded proof of bloodline, proof of power, proof that the child was what the prophecy described, and not a story built to justify a political maneuver. Leon set down his charcoal. He looked across the room at the man. "I don't want to be a weapon," he said. His voice was clear and small and absolutely steady. "I just want everyone to stop being scared of me." The chamber went quiet, in the way rooms only go quiet when something true has been said in them. In the back corner, Elder Mara, the oldest wolf alive and a woman not given to visible emotion, covered her mouth with one hand. The summit took 3 more days. At the end of it, all 5 kingdoms signed a covenant of recognition. Leon was named the Silver Anchor, under the combined protection of every wolf kingdom. The Hallowed Vale's representative signed last, slowly, and then looked at the boy who had spoken so plainly into the silence of that first afternoon, and nodded once. The Thornwall forces withdrew from the border. Seraphine sent a letter to her father. She found Alara in the corridor that evening, and told her the betrothal was dissolved, not because she had been asked to release it, and not because she had lost, but because she had spent 10 days watching Kaelin remember what he was supposed to be, and she was not the kind of woman who could live inside something she had chosen to become a wall against. She asked only for trade terms in place of the marriage treaty. Alara promised. They did not become friends that evening, but they recognized something in each other, and that was its own beginning. That night, when Leon was finally asleep and the castle had quieted to its low nighttime sounds, Kaelin found Alara on the upper terrace. The air was cold and very clear, the kind of clear that only comes after everything has been said. He did not make speeches. He asked her what she needed. Not what she would accept, not what was possible, but what she actually needed. No one had asked her that in 6 years. She told him. All of it. It took a while. He listened to every word. When she finished, he said, "I can't give you back the years." "I know," she said. "But I can start from tonight, if you'll let me." She looked at him for a long time. The mate bond that had been a quiet ache in both of them. A door neither had opened, a window painted shut, breathed warm and certain between them in the cold air. "Start from tonight," she said. 3 months later, there was another birthday. Not a 6th birthday this time, Just the ordinary, accumulated kind. The sort that comes around every year to remind you that time has passed, and you are still here, and the people you love are still beside you. Alara sat at a long table in Ironmore's great hall, with more people around her than her cottage had ever held, and Leon sat between her and Kaelin with cake on his chin, and Gran was there in a good chair by the fire, and outside the windows the torches burned their ordinary amber. Leanne looked up from his cake. "Were you always going to find each other again?" he asked. He was not asking because he didn't know. He was asking the way children ask things they have already settled for themselves, because they want to hear the words out loud. Ilara looked at Kaelin over his head. "I think so," she said. "I know so," Kaelin said. Leon nodded, satisfied, and went back to his cake. Outside, every wolf in Ironmore lifted their heads at the same moment, drawn not by power this time, not by silver light or the pull of prophecy or the weight of history, but by something quieter and older and more lasting than any of those things. The silver anchor was never going to be a weapon. He was always going to be this, a boy with cake on his chin and an oak leaf crown, sitting between two people who had found their way back to each other through the longest way possible, in a castle full of light. He was always going to be a beginning,